My mother managed my $75,000 college refund until I logged in and saw her name. My name is Hazel. I'm 58 years old, and the moment I logged into my old university portal last month, a warning flashed across the screen that made my stomach drop. Pending deposit reversal flagged. I hadn't touched that account in 30 years. So who on earth was reversing a $75,000 refund in my name? I clicked through the system, and that's when the real betrayal hit. Not only had someone rerouted every message, refund, and notice tied to my financial history, but the contact email, the home address, the signature on my guardian authorization all belonged to the same person, my mother. And as I kept digging, I realized this wasn't some recent misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a decades-long secret she never meant for me to uncover. But the story I'm about to tell you begins when I was a struggling 18-year-old, trying to navigate college life with far more anxiety than guidance. Even all these decades later, I can still feel the weight of those years pressing on my chest whenever I think about them. Back then, I'd believed I was doing everything right, juggling courses, scraping by at a part-time job, and trusting that my mother, Gloria, knew what she was doing when she insisted on managing all the financial paperwork for my education. It seemed like an act of generosity at the time. After all, she always said she knew more about adult matters than I did. But even in the moment, something about the arrangement felt off, as though I had handed over a part of my life without fully understanding what that meant. I hadn't thought about those years in a long time, certainly not about the money. Whatever refund or aid or loan adjustment happened in the past was buried in old memories I never bothered to revisit. So when, out of nowhere, my old university emailed me earlier this year, informing me of a recalculation in historical tuition charges, my first reaction was confusion. Universities don't usually go digging into 30-year-old ledgers unless something very strange is happening. I almost ignored the message, assuming it was a mistake or maybe even a scam, but curiosity and that tiny flicker of hope that never seems to die nudged me to read further. What I saw made my breath hitch. The message stated that, due to an extensive audit of old financial records, former students owed money were being contacted. My name was on that list, and according to the audit, I was entitled to a refund totaling $75,000. $75,000 for tuition I'd believed was fully paid and long forgotten. The number didn't feel real. I stared at it for several minutes, letting the shock ripple through me. At first, I considered deleting the email. It felt too good, or too bizarre, to be true. But the university wasn't finished with surprises. According to them, this wasn't their first attempt to reach me. They claimed they had mailed letters, sent emails, even attempted phone communication months earlier. That statement left me baffled because I had received none of it. Not a single notification, no letters, no emails, nothing. That's when an old discomfort from decades ago stirred in me. Back in college, I always knew my mother took an unusually intense interest in my financial aid status. She hovered over every statement, every tuition invoice. She insisted that all documents be sent to her address because she didn't want anything important getting lost in dorm mail rooms. I was young, overwhelmed, and too eager to believe she was helping me. I had been so desperate not to drown financially that I accepted her terms without questioning them. The email from the university said I needed to log into my student portal to verify my current information. I didn't even know my login still existed after all these years. The portal had changed names and formats since the 90s, but I followed their instructions, reset my credentials, and slowly navigated toward the login page. When I finally got in, after battling with security questions I barely remembered answering, I was hit with a tidal wave of memories. The grainy school crest, the archaic layout, the way the system displayed credits from semesters I hadn't thought about since I was a teenager. It all transported me right back into that uneasy version of myself. The girl who was constantly worrying about having enough for textbooks. The girl who lived in a cramped apartment and worked every spare hour at a bookstore just to afford groceries. The girl who believed her mother when she said there simply wasn't enough aid to cover everything. The further I clicked into the portal, the more my stomach twisted. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, maybe copies of old forms, maybe outdated contact information, but the truth was that I wasn't prepared for anything. Not really. I think part of me hoped for reassurance that the university simply made a mistake in their outreach attempts. Something harmless, something simple. But then I opened the financial communication settings, and that's when everything changed. Sitting there, exactly where my email and my contact information should have been, was a name I hadn't anticipated seeing. A name that made the hair on my arms rise and a cold, familiar dread slide down my spine. It didn't make sense at first, but the more I stared, the more undeniable it became. My mother's name was on my account, not in an emergency contact field, not in an optional parent info box, but in a place she absolutely had no right to be. And in that moment, I felt myself freeze, because whatever this was, it wasn't accidental. The moment I saw my mother's name on that page, I felt a rush of disbelief so sharp it bordered on physical pain. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting to make sure I wasn't misreading. But there it was, clear as day, sitting in a field labeled Refund Disbursement Contact, a place that, in any normal circumstance, would list the student themselves. Instead, it showed Gloria Delmont, my mother, with her old personal email address beneath it. Not an academic email, not a shared family inbox, but the very same private address she used when I was in college. The one she kept secret from most people, the one she checked obsessively. Seeing it there made my pulse spike. I scrolled further, hoping this was some strange clerical glitch left over from the 90s, but the timestamps told another story. The university's portal had been updated repeatedly over the years, and every line in the audit log showed activity tied not to me, but to her. Updates made during semesters when I was drowning in coursework, when I barely had time to breathe, let alone hover over financial forms. And each edit, every alteration to my contact info, every address update, was logged as coming from the same device ID, an ID that clearly wasn't mine. A cold, uneasy memory washed over me, my mother standing at the kitchen table, a stack of university envelopes in her hands, shooing me away as though I were interrupting something sacred. She always opened my mail herself. "You don't need to worry about this," she'd say firmly, folding the papers back into envelopes before I could read them. "College is stressful enough. Let me handle the boring adult stuff." At the time, I thought she was protecting me from confusion. Now I understood she was protecting herself from exposure. Another flashback surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in decades. It was during my sophomore year when I noticed a mysterious charge on my tuition summary. I'd gone to my mother asking what it meant, and she'd snapped, "Hazel, please. You wouldn't understand the paperwork even if I explained it." She said it with such finality, such irritation, that I'd felt stupid for even asking. That moment had stuck with me because it was the first time I questioned whether she was truly helping me or helping herself. Now, staring at the portal, the truth hit me like a punch. She hadn't just managed my tuition notices. She had controlled my entire financial profile, top to bottom, for the entire time I was in school. I clicked through more tabs, trying to make sense of everything. Then I saw a section labeled Disbursement History. My stomach knotted as I expanded it. According to university records, multiple past refund checks, small amounts from overpayments, corrected lab fees, various adjustments, had been issued throughout my college years. But beside each one was a status that made my skin crawl. Claimed. Claimed? By whom? Certainly not by me. I never saw a penny of those refunds. I remembered asking my mother countless times why I couldn't afford textbooks, while other students seemed to manage fine. I remembered her saying, "The aid doesn't cover everything, Hazel. You'll have to make do." I remembered skipping meals so I could afford required materials. I remembered working double shifts at the campus bookstore, wondering why I was always broke while supposedly receiving aid. But what if I wasn't broke? What if she had been intercepting those funds the entire time? My breath came shallowly as the pieces snapped together in my mind. My mother had controlled my mail. She had controlled my addresses. She had insisted I never contact the financial aid office myself. She had told me I was too young to understand my own school finances. And all this time, years, decades, unclaimed money hadn't been unclaimed at all. It had been stolen, not accidentally, not as a misunderstanding, but deliberately, step by step, masked under the guise of motherly guidance. My hands trembled as I scrolled lower in the disbursement history, my eyes darting over each line. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small blue hyperlink at the bottom of the page. It read, "View historical deposit destinations." The words seemed to glow on the screen. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. This link might reveal exactly where those checks went, exactly whose bank account received money meant for me, exactly how deep this betrayal stretched. I hesitated only for a second. Then I clicked it. And in that split second, as the page began to load, I felt my entire world tilt, because whatever I was about to see had the power to rewrite everything I thought I knew about my past. The page loaded slowly, as if the university portal itself understood the gravity of what it was about to reveal. When the list finally appeared, I leaned forward, my heart thudding heavily in my chest. A table stretched across the screen with columns for date, amount, status, and, most importantly, deposit destination. I scanned the first line and felt the blood drain from my face. The deposits, every single one, had been routed into a checking account ending in digits I didn't recognize. In fact, I didn't recognize the bank at all. It wasn't one I had ever used in my adult life. I had opened my first account with a local credit union during freshman year, and I had never changed banks, not once. Yet the system claimed my refunds had been sent elsewhere. I clicked the destination details for the first entry, a refund issued during my sophomore fall semester. A tiny window popped up, listing the old bank's name. My pulse quickened. I knew that name. It was the same bank my mother had used when I was growing up, the one she visited weekly, almost ritualistically, with deposit envelopes she never let me peek inside. That same bank, her bank, was listed as the destination for my college refunds. I clicked another line in the portal, then another and another. Each entry told the same story. Refund of $312.47, deposited refund of $689.91, deposited refund of $421, deposited refund of $778.02, deposited dozens of them, all small amounts, scattered across different semesters. And every single one was routed to that same bank, that same account number, that same unauthorized destination. Not one of those deposits was mine. A strange stillness settled over me as I stared at the screen. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before the realization of a life-changing truth, a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Suddenly, I was 19 again, standing in a campus bookstore with shaking hands, wondering how I was supposed to pay for 180 worth of lab materials when my financial aid hadn't covered that type of expense. I had called my mother, trembling, embarrassed to admit I couldn't afford something as basic as lab supplies. I remembered her sighing heavily, the sound dripping with disappointment. She had said, "Hazel, I told you the aid doesn't cover everything. You'll have to figure this out on your own. Life isn't supposed to be easy." But what if it had covered it? What if that $180 was sitting in one of those deposits? What if the money that could have bought textbooks, groceries, winter clothing, anything to make my life a little easier, had been quietly diverted somewhere I never had access to? The memories that surfaced next came like rapid, painful flashes. The cramped apartment I could barely afford. The nights I skipped dinner to stretch my paycheck. The double shifts at the bookstore and the tutoring gig I picked up just to survive. The way my mother always insisted she was helping me build character. But now, looking at this evidence, the narrative twisted into something uglier. She hadn't been helping, she had been taking. I sat back in my chair, breathing unevenly. My mother had always controlled the narrative of my young adulthood, convinced me I had no financial knowledge, no ability to manage my own life. But here was proof, literal logged, time-stamped proof, that she had been siphoning money meant for me. And if she had taken all these smaller refunds, how much had she taken overall? How deep did this betrayal go? I needed to know. I needed proof, hard copies, something I could hold in my hands. So I grabbed a stack of paper and began printing every page. The deposit history, the contact logs, the email records, the audit trails. Page after page spilled into the printer tray as I worked, my fingers trembling each time I pressed the print button. I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle I never even knew existed. But as the stack grew, so did my dread. Because the more I looked, the more I realized the missing money wasn't a few $100s here and there. It added up into the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. And this was only what I could see from the university portal. Who knew what else had slipped through my fingers without me ever knowing? Just as I printed the last page, I returned to the audit log, again, trying to digest every line, every edit, every modification tied back to my mother's name. And that's when something new caught my eye. A line different from the others, one I hadn't noticed before. Beside a date from early in my freshman year, written in a faint gray font, were the words, "Manual override by authorized guardian." Authorized guardian? I had never authorized anyone. I had never approved a guardian on my financial accounts. I had never signed anything giving her control. My mouth went dry. What was that override? Who designated her as a guardian? And most importantly, what else had she overridden? As my eyes locked onto that phrase again, a cold certainty settled in my chest. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was something far more deliberate. And I wasn't even close to uncovering the full truth. Staring at the phrase, "manual override by authorized guardian," felt like watching a crack spread across a piece of glass. Slow at first, then rapidly branching into every corner of my history. I clicked the note, expecting maybe a technical explanation, a glitch, an administrative placeholder, anything that wouldn't confirm the fear blooming inside me. But instead, another window opened, revealing a document I had never seen in my life. The heading read, "Financial Guardian Authorization Form, Student Accounts Division." The date stamped on it aligned with my first week of freshman year, and beneath that, in a signature box clearly meant for me, was a shaky, slanted approximation of my handwriting. It was supposed to be my signature, but it wasn't. Not even close. I felt my throat tighten as I zoomed in on the stroke patterns. I signed my name with a looping H, always had, ever since middle school. The signature on the form had a sharp, angular H instead. My lowercase a had a distinct tail. The one on this form didn't. And the more I examined it, the more certain I became. This wasn't a youthful version of my handwriting. It wasn't a rushed signature. It wasn't something I'd forgotten or overlooked. It was a forgery, and it had been sitting in my file for more than 3 decades. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. My mother hadn't just meddled. She hadn't just intercepted things. She had arranged to become the legal authority over my financial affairs at a time when I was technically an adult without my consent. As the weight of that realization settled on me, memories began rising one by one, like artifacts being unearthed from sand. Suddenly, it made sense why she had dictated where I lived during those years, insisting I stay in the cheapest possible apartment, even though the university had approved me for on-campus housing assistance. It made sense why she controlled every bill, every refund, every decision tied to my education. She used to tell me I couldn't handle the responsibility, and I believed her because, well, she was my mother. She was supposed to want the best for me. But now those moments felt sinister. A painful memory pushed itself to the front of my mind. The afternoon she took my debit card from me. I had just opened an account at the campus credit union. I was so proud, my own card, my own money, something that finally felt like adulthood. But when I showed it to her, she responded not with encouragement, but with irritation. She reached out, snatched it from my hand, and said sharply, "You're going to lose this. I'll keep it safe." And I, timid, inexperienced, eager not to upset her, didn't protest. I never saw that card again. I never questioned it. Not really. I assumed she was right. Looking back now, I felt a sickening mix of anger and humiliation. She had taken advantage of my youth, my trust, my fear of confrontation. She'd built a cage out of guidance and convinced me it was protection. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I stared again at the forged form. I needed answers, real ones, from someone who could explain exactly what had been done to my file. So, without hesitating, I grabbed my phone and dialed the university's finance office. I prayed someone would pick up quickly. I didn't think I could sit with my own spiraling thoughts for another minute. A woman answered, her voice calm, professional. I introduced myself, gave my old student ID number, and explained that I had discovered some irregularities in my archived account. There was a long pause as she pulled up my records. I could hear her typing, hear papers shuffling, and then her tone shifted subtly, tightening around the edges. "Ms. Delmont," she said carefully, "there's quite a lot of activity here for an account this old." I swallowed hard. "I know. I'm trying to understand what it all means." She murmured something under her breath, then said, "I need to review your file more closely. The system shows a guardian authorization that doesn't align with standard procedure for that year." Guardian authorization. The phrase made my stomach turn. She continued, "I'm also seeing a recent refund issued to you. Quite a substantial one." She paused, scrolling. "Yes, here it is. A check for $75,000 was processed and mailed several months ago." My breath caught. "Mailed where?" "To the address on file," she answered without hesitating. I gripped the edge of my desk so tightly my knuckles whitened. "What address is on file?" She hesitated. I heard a faint exhale, uncertainty, maybe discomfort. Then her voice softened in a way that made every muscle in my body tense. "Ms. Delmont," she said slowly, "before I tell you, I need to ask something." Another silence. I could almost hear her forming the words. "Do you know a Gloria?" The air seemed to collapse inside my lungs, because the way she asked it told me everything. The staff member's question, "Do you know a Gloria?" rang in my ears long. After she said it, I felt myself gripping the phone so tightly the plastic creaked. My throat went dry, but I forced out a small, steady, "Yes, she's my mother." There was no relief in admitting it. If anything, saying it aloud made the situation feel even more surreal, like I had just placed a final puzzle piece into a picture I didn't want to see. The staff member inhaled sharply. "Ms. Delmont, the records I'm seeing indicate that your mother signed for the $75,000 refund." My heart lurched. "That's impossible," I whispered, though the tremor in my voice betrayed how little I believed my own words. "I never received a check. It was addressed to me. Why would she sign for something that wasn't hers?" Another pause, longer this time. "We have the acknowledgement on file," the staff member said quietly. "Your mother's signature is on the receipt. She provided identification. It was logged as delivered and accepted." I reeled. The room tilted as I struggled to steady my breathing. My mother had signed for a check worth more than I made in an entire year during some of my hardest adult seasons, and never told me. She hadn't even hinted at it. She simply took it as though it belonged to her, as though I belonged to her. I forced myself to speak, my voice cracking. How was she even allowed to receive it? Why wasn't it sent to my address? "The address on your account," the staff member began, choosing her words carefully, "was updated several years after your graduation. It reflects a handwritten change submitted physically. Signed by your designated guardian." I closed my eyes, the weight of that phrase, designated guardian, burning my nerves. The forged authorization form, the decades of tampered communication, all of it pointed to one horrifying truth. My mother had maintained secret control of my student account well into adulthood. She must have updated it without my knowledge," I said faintly. "It's unusual," the woman on the phone admitted. "Very unusual, especially for an account this old. And given what you've told me about the discrepancies you're seeing, I think this may fall outside standard administrative error. Code 4. This looks like fraud." My stomach clenched. "What am I supposed to do?" Her tone softened. "Ms. Delmont, I'm going to recommend you speak with our fraud department. I can transfer you, but they may need documentation. Screenshots, printed logs, anything that shows inconsistencies in your records." I nodded reflexively, even though she couldn't see me. "I have everything," I said. "Or, I'm gathering it." "Good," she replied quietly. "You'll want a full paper trail, especially if your identity or financial authorization was used without permission." The words hit hard. Without permission. Because while I always knew my mother had been controlling, manipulative, dismissive, this was different. This wasn't just emotional control. This was theft. Real, intentional theft. And suddenly, the memories I had always chalked up to her being overbearing replayed with new, sharper clarity. Her intercepting my mail, her hiding tuition records from me, her insisting she alone understood the paperwork, her taking my debit card and never giving it back, her telling me I had to learn independence, all while keeping me financially dependent. I felt sick. Every sacrifice I'd made in college, every hardship I'd endured, every moment I believed I wasn't trying hard enough, was steeped in a lie. She had stolen not just my money, but my stability, my opportunity, my future. The staff member broke into my thoughts. "Would you like me to transfer you now, Ms. Delmont?" I hesitated, not because I doubted the need. I absolutely needed fraud involved, but because my mind raced with the next steps. I knew myself well enough to understand that once I made that call, there would be no undoing this, no turning back. And before I involved the fraud division, before I confronted the university any further, before I took on this battle, I needed proof. Concrete, physical proof. "I'll call them once I gather all the documents," I said finally. "Thank you for your help." "Of course," she replied softly. "And Hazel, I'm sorry you're dealing with this." When the call ended, I sat frozen in silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, I turned back to my computer and resumed printing everything I could find. Every page, every log, every suspicious detail. My printer hummed relentlessly, filling the room with the sound of truth becoming tangible. As the stack grew thicker, so did the ache in my chest. My own mother, my own blood. She had taken money meant to lift me up, money that could have saved me from years of struggle, money she simply decided she deserved more than I did. I swallowed hard, biting back a wave of anguish. She hadn't just stolen a refund, she had stolen decades of my life. But I wasn't a scared kid anymore, and this time, she wouldn't be the one controlling the narrative. I reached for another page, only to be interrupted by a soft chime from a notification flashed across the portal. "Alert, pending deposit reversal, flagged." My breath stopped. What reversal? By whom? And why now? The timing was too perfect. Something was happening behind the scenes, right this second. And whatever it wasn't good. The alert, pending deposit reversal, flagged, blinked at me like a warning light on the edge of a cliff. My first instinct was to deny what it implied, but deep down I already knew. Something in the system had been triggered, and not by the university. Someone was trying to pull money back, hide a trail, or undo a financial action tied to my refund. And there was only one person who had ever interfered with my university accounts in the first place. A wave of cold. Dread washed over me. I grabbed my phone and dialed the university's fraud division. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't take notes. I didn't breathe until someone answered. A man picked up, polite, concise, the kind of voice trained to handle emergencies without revealing panic. I gave him my student ID number, summarized everything I'd found, and then read the alert word for word. He typed rapidly on his end, the faint clicking audible through the receiver. After a moment, he said, "Yes, I see the flag. It appears a reversal request was submitted on the deposit that originally issued the refund." My heart pounded. "Submitted by who?" He hesitated. "We're tracing the device ID now." The silence stretched. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. Every muscle in my body wound tight. Finally, he spoke again. "The reversal attempt came from a device recognized in previous account updates." Another pause. "It's the same device associated with the original disbursement change." The words sank in like ice. My mother's device. She knew. Somehow she knew I had logged in. She knew the trail she'd left behind was exposed. She knew I was unraveling the entire web. I felt fury and heartbreak collide inside my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. "Please freeze everything until I can provide documentation." "We already initiated a hold," he confirmed. "Given the irregularities, we strongly advise you gather all records and prepare for an official fraud investigation." I ended the call with trembling hands. Suddenly, every memory of my mother's control took on a new, painful shape. The time she forced me to let her handle paperwork, the way she scolded me for asking about my aid packages, the lectures about responsibility while she quietly intercepted every resource meant for me. Even moments that had once seemed harmless now felt like calculated moves in a decades-long strategy. Her advice about apartments, her insistence that I work more hours, her guilt trips when I needed basic supplies, her condescending tone whenever I asked about finances. It had never been about guidance. It had always been about power. And she had wielded that power like a weapon. I stared at the thick stack of printed pages on my desk, the proof of everything she had done, and something hard and certain settled inside me. It was time to confront her, to demand answers she had avoided my entire life. I picked up the stack, slid it into a folder, grabbed my keys, and walked to my car with more resolve than I'd felt in years. The drive to her house felt surreal. Familiar streets passed by in a blur, memories clinging to each place like ghosts. The grocery store where she refused to let me buy unnecessary items. The post office she always insisted on visiting alone. The bank she guarded like a fortress. By the time I pulled into her driveway, my hands were steady. My heart, not so much. I knocked on the door. She opened it almost immediately, as though she had been waiting. Her face tightened the moment she saw the papers in my hand. "What's all that?" she asked sharply. "Mom," I said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, "we need to talk about the university." Her expression shifted, anger flickering beneath a veneer of forced calm. "Hazel, I don't know what nonsense you're involved in, but I don't appreciate being—" "Stop." My voice surprised even me. "I know everything." She froze. I laid the folder on the kitchen table and opened it. One by one, I set down each printed page. The forged Guardian authorization, the rerouted refunds, the old bank account, the claimed checks, the address changes submitted without my knowledge. Her face drained of color. Then suddenly, it twisted into something defensive and sharp. "You don't understand," she snapped. "You were irresponsible. You couldn't handle money. I had to protect you from ruining your life." "By stealing from me?" I shot back. "By forging my signature? By intercepting money that was mine?" She slammed her hand on the table. "I needed the money more than you. You would have wasted it. You always needed someone to manage things for you." Her voice cracked, not with remorse, but with frustration, as though she were the victim. I stared at her, feeling something inside me break, something irreplaceable. My mother hadn't taken the money out of necessity. She had taken it because she believed she was entitled to it, because she believed I wasn't. My voice came out quiet but razor sharp. "Where's my $75,000 now?" The question sliced through the air, landing heavy and deadly between us. She went still, completely still. And in that silence, I realized the truth might be even worse than the theft itself. My question, "Where is my $75,000 now?" hung in the air like a blade suspended by a single thread. My mother stood frozen, her jaw tight, her eyes darting in small, frantic movements that told me she was calculating, not regretting. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, strained, and sharp around the edges. "I used it," she said. Just those 3 words, spoken so plainly, so coldly, that for a moment I didn't understand them. My mind refused to process their meaning, but then she continued, almost impatiently, as if I were the unreasonable one. "I had debts, Hazel. Real debts. You have no idea how much I sacrificed for you growing up. I had credit cards to pay, medical expenses, the house, everything. I needed that money more than you did." A chill crawled up my spine. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even trying to soften the blow. She was justifying it, as though her needs automatically superseded mine. "You used my refund to pay your debts?" I asked, disbelief cracking my voice. She crossed her arms defensively. "And I invested some of it. Smart investments. Ones you never would have made, because you've always lacked financial sense. I put it somewhere it could grow, instead of letting you blow it on nonsense." My mouth fell open. "It wasn't yours," she shot back. "I raised you. You owe me more than you realize. Don't stand there acting like I stole from you. I took what was due." The words hit me like a physical impact. Due? She truly believed she had a right to it, that everything I earned, everything I was entitled to, somehow belonged to her first. And suddenly, all those years of manipulation, small comments, guilt trips, withheld information, flooded into clarity. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This wasn't an act of desperation. This was a mindset, a belief system, one she had lived by for decades. "Mom," I said quietly, "you forged my signature." She waved her hand dismissively. "You were too immature to handle money at 18. Someone had to step in. You would have wasted your aid, spent it on things you didn't need. I did what was necessary." Necessary. She said it like she had performed some noble act, like committing fraud had been a favor to me. I felt something inside me crack, not a loud shatter, but a small, heartbreaking splinter. She had rewritten our entire family history in her mind. Every controlling act had become protection. Every lie had been recast as a lesson. Every theft had been framed as responsibility. And now, backed into a corner, she wasn't remorseful. She was indignant. "You forced me to do it," she continued, her voice rising. "You never paid attention. You never appreciated what I did. You made it so hard to parent you. What was I supposed to do? Let you ruin your life? Let the money go to waste? I took charge because you wouldn't." I stared at her, stunned. "I didn't force you to lie," I whispered. "You chose to." She scoffed. "You're being dramatic." The argument escalated into a spiral of blame. Every time I confronted her with a fact, she twisted it into an accusation against me. Every betrayal became a failure on my part. Every theft became an act of necessary intervention. It felt like I was arguing with a wall that was determined not to admit it was crumbling. At some point, something inside me shifted. I felt myself pulling away, not physically, but emotionally, detaching, disengaging. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't disbelief. It was clarity, cold, steady clarity. My mother was never going to admit the truth, not the truth that mattered, not the truth that counted. And I was done fighting for something she would never give me: accountability, remorse, honesty. So I picked up my folder of evidence, closed it calmly, and looked her directly in the eyes. "I'm filing a fraud claim," I said, "and I'm done letting you shape the narrative of my life." She blinked, stunned by the calmness in my voice, because she couldn't manipulate calm. She couldn't twist it. She couldn't dominate it. I turned and walked toward the door. She didn't reach for me. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She just stood there, breathing hard, as though I had betrayed her. I drove straight home and called the university's fraud division. This time there was no hesitation. I submitted every document, every printout, every screenshot. The fraud officer reviewed everything carefully, and his tone hardened as he spoke. "Ms. Delmont," he said, "based on what you've provided, we are formally opening an investigation. There are multiple red flags here: signature inconsistencies, unauthorized address changes, repeated alterations from a non-student device. This is serious." "I know," I whispered. "We will be in touch as soon as we gather more information." After I ended the call, I sat in silence, exhausted but steady. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my mother's influence beginning to loosen around me, but that moment didn't last long. My phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I pressed play, expecting more denial, more anger. What I heard instead was my mother's shaking voice. "Hazel, you don't understand what this will uncover." Her words trembled with fear, not for me, but for herself. And I knew then, the real horror hadn't even surfaced yet. My mother's voicemail played on repeat in my mind long after it ended. Her voice had been shaky, breathless, almost cracking, but not from guilt, not from regret. What I heard was fear, pure, unfiltered fear, and her words, "You don't understand what this will uncover," echoed with a weight that made my skin crawl. What exactly did she think would come out? What else had she done? The question gnawed at me as I waited for the university's fraud division to call back. I didn't have to wait long. Less than a day later, my phone rang. The same fraud officer from earlier spoke in a tone that was businesslike but tense. "Ms. Delmont, we've begun reviewing your documents, but there are irregularities dating back to the early 90s. To fully investigate, we need any original paperwork you still have: tuition statements, aid notifications, award letters, anything." I almost laughed. Original paperwork? My mother practically made a career out of hiding my paperwork from me. Still, I told him I'd look. I hung up, grabbed a flashlight, and headed up to the attic, an old, musty space filled with boxes I hadn't touched in decades. Dust swirled in the air as I opened the first stack, rummaging through old notebooks, yearbooks, and forgotten trinkets from my youth. The third box was the one that stopped me cold. Inside was a stack of envelopes, sealed, faded, all bearing the university's crest. Dozens of them, maybe more. My heart beat faster as I picked one up, running my thumb over the slit of dried adhesive. It had been opened, but not by me. Not ever by me. I tore through envelope after envelope, each revealing letters I had never seen. Letters my mother must have intercepted and tucked away for reasons I couldn't yet grasp. The first letter that caught my eye was dated my freshman spring semester. It read, "Dear Hazel Delmont, we are pleased to inform you that, due to a recalculation of course lab fees, you are eligible for a refund of $412.86. My breath stuttered. Another envelope contained notification of an additional $600 housing stipend adjustment. Another, a corrected scholarship disbursement. But the letter that truly made my knees weaken was one with a bold header. Congratulations, Hazel. You have been selected as the recipient of the Vance Honors Scholarship for Academic Achievement. I felt the words hit me like a blow, because I remembered this scholarship, not receiving it, but being told, clearly, firmly, that I hadn't earned it. My mother had said, "They must have confused you with someone else, and that I shouldn't get my hopes up about such things because those awards are for exceptional students." But the letter in my hands, printed decades earlier, told a very different story. I had earned it. I had been awarded it, and she had hidden it. I sank onto the attic floor, surrounded by letters that collectively rewrote my entire history. Every financial struggle I thought was my fault. Every time I believed I wasn't good enough, responsible enough, smart enough. She had engineered that narrative by stealing opportunities right out from under me. And suddenly, I understood something chilling. The theft hadn't started with a refund or a forged signature. It had started much earlier, back when I was barely an adult, still raw and hopeful and trusting. My mother had stolen not just money, she had stolen confidence, stability, self-worth, a future that could have looked entirely different. With shaking hands, I gathered every letter, every envelope, every scrap of evidence, and carried them downstairs. I scanned each document, attaching them to an email to the fraud division. Before I even hit send, the officer responded to a preliminary file I'd already forwarded. "Ms. Delmont," he said, "this is extensive, much more extensive than we anticipated. We need to escalate this to our legal review team. You should be aware, this may involve criminal charges." Criminal charges. Against my mother. For a moment, I felt a dizzying mix of vindication and grief. I never wanted my life to come to this. I never wanted to be the daughter whose own mother put her in the position of filing a fraud claim. But here I was, forced into a corner she had built with lies, forged signatures, and decades of manipulation. I hit send on the final batch of documents. Then I sank into my couch, exhausted. My entire body felt heavy, like the air itself had gained weight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness settled over my house. I tried to calm my thoughts, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the letters, the stolen refund, the forged signature, the scholarship I never knew I'd won. My mother's voice telling me I wasn't exceptional. A knock at the door jolted me upright. It was late, too late for casual visitors. My heart pounded as I walked to the door, each step echoing in the silence. I opened it slowly, and there she was. My mother stood on my porch, trembling. Her eyes were red, her face pale, her breathing uneven. She looked smaller somehow, shrunken from the weight of something she hadn't yet spoken. "Hazel," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, there's more." And in that moment, I realized I hadn't even reached the bottom of this decades-deep well of lies. My mother stood on my porch, trembling, her eyes swollen and glossy. For a moment, I simply stared at her, this woman who had shaped my entire life, not with guidance or love, but with control and deception so deep it had woven itself into the very fabric of who I thought I was. I stepped aside just enough for her to enter, though every instinct told me to keep her at arm's length. She walked inside slowly, almost timidly, as if crossing the threshold required more courage than she possessed. I kept my distance, arms folded, spine straight. "Hazel," she whispered, voice raw, "you don't understand. I didn't do it to hurt you." I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice, and I didn't owe her reassurance. She took a shaky breath. "I did it because I was afraid," she said. "Afraid you'd leave me behind. Afraid you'd become someone so successful you wouldn't need me anymore." I felt a hollow ache deep in my chest. Fear? That was her justification? Not remorse, not regret, fear of losing control. She continued, "You were always so independent, even as a child. I knew if I let you handle your own money, you'd stop needing me. You'd outgrow me." Her voice quivered. "So I made sure you stayed close." It landed like a confession and an indictment all at once. "You manipulated me," I said quietly. "You kept me struggling so I couldn't move forward." She flinched but didn't deny it. "I had to. You were slipping away. You were getting stronger, more confident. If you'd realized how capable you were—" Her voice cracked. "You would have left." I stared at her, stunned by the twisted logic. "So you stole from me? Year after year? Refunds, stipends, scholarships? You took them because you didn't want me to grow?" Her chin trembled. "It wasn't like that. I needed you to rely on me." "No," I said, steadier now. "You needed me to be small." The truth hung heavy between us. For the first time, I truly saw her, not as the mother I wanted her to be, not as the authority I grew up fearing, not as the caretaker she pretended to be. I saw her as a woman terrified of abandonment, willing to sabotage her own child to avoid it. "I know I made mistakes," she whispered. "Mistakes?" I repeated, disbelief sharpening my words. "Mom, this wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy." She recoiled slightly, then pressed on. "Hazel, you have to stop the investigation. If they press charges, I'll lose everything. My retirement, the house, everything." Her desperation clawed at the air between us, but inside me, something had shifted too far to be softened. Every letter in the attic, every forged form, every dollar rerouted, every lie wrapped in maternal condescension, all of it had carved a line I could no longer cross. "I can't stop it," I said firmly. She shook her head desperately, tears welling. "Please, you don't understand what will happen to me." "And you don't understand what already happened to me," I replied. "What you took from me. The years I spent struggling because you wanted control. The opportunities I never had because you hid them. The self-doubt I lived with because you engineered it." Her face crumpled. "I'm still your mother." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "And I'm still the daughter you betrayed." Silence fell. Thick, unmoving, suffocating. Finally, I stepped toward the door and opened it. My voice didn't shake when I spoke. "It's time for you to go." She hesitated, staring at me as though waiting for me to take it back, waiting for the version of me she had groomed, obedient, unsure, dependent, to reemerge. But that Hazel was gone. When she realized it, something in her posture collapsed. She walked out slowly, as though each step was unfamiliar. I closed the door behind her, feeling the latch click like the sealing of a chapter I had never consented to live. Days passed. The fraud division contacted me frequently, gathering documents, verifying timelines, cross-referencing signatures. With each conversation, more of the truth solidified, a truth too large to hide behind fear or excuses. Then one morning, I received an official notification from the university's legal department. The message was brief, formal, and definitive. The $75,000 refund has been legally reassigned to the rightful recipient, Hazel Delmont. For the first time in years, I felt something close to relief, not because of the money itself, but because the truth had finally been acknowledged. My mother's web of lies had begun to unravel, not by her choice, but by the force of facts she could no longer distort. Later that afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox bearing the university's crest again. My stomach tightened. I opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. It wasn't about the refund. It was about something else entirely. "Dear Ms. Delmont, during the ongoing audit of student accounts, we have discovered additional discrepancies pertaining to your financial history. You may be entitled to another reimbursement pending verification. I read the line twice. Another reimbursement? My pulse quickened as I realized the story wasn't over, not even close. In the end, reclaiming that refund didn't just return money, it returned pieces of myself I didn't realize were taken. The truth forced me to rebuild the parts of my life shaped by someone else's choices, and for the first time, I finally feel in control of my own future. It's strange how a number in an old database can unravel decades of silence, sacrifice, and secrets. And yet, maybe this whole journey wasn't just about the money at all. Tell me, if you uncovered a betrayal buried 30 years in your past, would you confront it or let it stay buried? If this journey made you think twice about the stories hidden in your own past, you're not alone. Every voice here helps bring these truths into the light. Your support is what keeps these real, complicated stories alive and worth telling. If you'd like to hear more moments where the past finally answers back, you know exactly where to find me. Let me know when you want the full script combined with this ending.